Before we dive into actually using the tool, I want to give you an orientation and talk about creating and opening projects, plus give you a tour of the various project and tool windows so you understand the big picture of how the tool is used, and you'll be able to easily find the most important windows when it comes time to use the product. So let's jump in and check it out. When you first open UiPath, you'll be presented with this Start window. There are several menu items on the left that we'll discuss in the UI tour video. You can quickly open recent projects over on the right side here, but to create a brand new project, you would make use of this center column. The top two items are both blank, so you can create a blank process or a blank library item. You would use this when you want to build a robot, and this when you want to build a reusable component, which we'll discuss in a future video. The bottom section here contains templates. While this one is going to be an empty canvas when you use it, this one will have a flowchart activity on that canvas and have some example prearranged nodes to give you an idea of how to use a flowchart. This one, as you can see, is intended to be an attended robot that can be triggered by a mouse or keyboard user event. And this template on the bottom is what's called the Robotic Enterprise Framework, or RE framework for short. This is intended to be a starter project for enterprise robots. It's pretty heavy with lots of layers, and I give you a walkthrough of that in my Level 2 course. For now, let's go ahead and click on a blank process and see what that looks like. As I discuss in the conventions section of my UiPath Level 2 course, we typically use the Pascal naming convention here to create a robot name with no spaces or hyphens or underscores. So I'll call this my first robot with no spaces. I'm going to choose to save it in my C drive in a development directory and a UiPath subdirectory, but you can save it wherever you want. And this is just a free text field where you type in something about the robot's purpose and click Create. When we're working on a robot, the place we'll spend the most time is this pane right in the center. So often what I like to do is move these other panes to the side a little bit, or even unpin them so that they collapse. But I especially like to collapse this top ribbon up here. And you can do that by double-clicking any one of these menu items to hide it. And now you can simply click on the menu item to show, select what you want, and when you click on the button, it will auto-hide again. It's also important to notice that the menu system is more like the newer Microsoft applications, meaning there's no file menu that has save or save as. Instead, there's this start menu. And when you click on that, it takes you back to that start screen we were on so you could create a new project, or access settings and tools and things like that. Notice here in the top of the window, my project is still open. To get back to it, I can click on this arrow at the top left. I'll have a full interface tour in a different lecture, but the most important thing you need to understand about creating robots is that we can use this Activities tab to drag and drop activities into this canvas in the center. So if I grab a sequence and drag it on, that's a container for other activities. I can drag a message box in there, for instance, and put a string in here that just says hello. And when I run the robot, it pops up that dialog and says hello. When I click OK, the robot is done, and it brings the UiPath Studio interface back. When you click on any activity in the canvas, you'll see more details, or what's called properties, in this pane on the right side. And you can expand or contract that, and even pull this little section further to the left or to the right, depending upon how big these values are. When you click on a different activity, the properties of that activity are now shown in the right side here. So notice down here, this is cut off, so I can pull this out a little bit and then resize the properties pane to show all the relevant data. Another useful feature down here is this zoom area, which allows you to shrink the view down to a smaller size in case you have lots of activities in the canvas and you need to be able to see the big picture. You can also press your Control key on the keyboard and roll the mouse wheel to zoom in or zoom out on the canvas. If you wanted to use a flowchart instead of a sequence, you would simply click on Activities and either navigate down here into Workflow, Flowchart, but UiPath has been moving activities around, so it's often better to just use the search bar up here and type in Flowchart. That way, wherever that activity is, searching will shrink down this list and allow you to very easily click and drag it onto the canvas. If this is something you feel like you're going to use frequently, go ahead and right-click on it and select Add to Favorites, because then it's always going to appear up here in this top favorites area, So you don't even have to bother typing anything in or navigating. Just open up favorites and drag it onto the canvas. To open existing robots, you can simply go back to this Start tab, and you can either select something from the recent pane here, and they're ordered by recent usage descending, or you can jump over here to the Open link, and when you click on that, it gives you a typical file chooser window, and you can jump into your C Development UiPath directory and see your various robot folders. Double-click into one, and you'll see we have this main.xaml file. Double-click on that, save any existing project you might have open, and now the new robot project is open. The final point I'd like to make about projects is that no matter how many activities you drag into this pane, and nested activities within nested activities, you're always only going to have this one main.xaml file. It's pretty amazing how they can keep track of all of this stuff in one single file. So every robot project you create, regardless of how many activities you drag on, is going to have that one main.xaml file. You can get a peek at what it looks like behind the scenes if you go into your C Development UiPath folder or wherever it is you stored your robots. Double-click in the project folder and then right-click on main.xaml and open with whatever application you desire. I'll just open it up with a simple notepad, and as you scroll through, you can see that they're using an XML type structure to represent all of the activities and the details within. Now, it is possible, and actually quite common, to wind up with more than just a main.xaml file in your robot. And as I'll demonstrate in future videos, the way that's going to happen is if you right-click on a series of activities and you say Extract as Workflow, and you give this a new name, you can see that this new file will be stored in the same directory as your original robot project, and it's going to show up as a second file in your project. And you can see this by going over to the Project tab on the left, and now you have two files in there. And if you ever close your files, you can always get back to them using this Project tab on the left and double-click either of them to open them up. Now, if you ever want to create a second robot that's similar to another robot you created, you can obviously jump into your C drive here. In whatever folder you stored your robots, you can copy the top-level project directory, paste it in, rename that directory, and now you've got a new robot project that's based on the robot you copied. If you do that, you're going to want to make sure you go into this project.json file, open with some kind of a text editor, and update the name and description, because those don't get changed when you simply copy and paste the directory. So since we called this my copied robot, I would just change these, save that file, and now when I go into UiPath, I can go to the Start menu, open a project, jump up to my top-level directory of robots, drill into this new folder, double-click on main.xaml, and now you can see I have a new project open, and it's called My Copied Robot. So those are the most important fundamentals for dealing with UiPath projects. In this video, I'd like to walk through all the various project windows that you're going to need to take advantage of while you're creating robots. So I'm going to open a project by double-clicking the main.xaml file. And the first thing I'll do is draw your attention to this top menu. This is actually a ribbon, and if you use this down arrow on the top right, or simply double-click any of these items, you expand that ribbon. It's always kind of weird because if you click on the Start tab here in the top left, it takes you out of the application and back to open files. So I do that by accident sometimes, and to get back to the application, simply click on this arrow here at the top left. So the tab you'll spend the most time on is this Design tab. And all of these options up here give you the ability to create new activities down here in the main designer pane. And as you'll see in future videos, you also have the ability to interact with variables and even launch this UI Explorer, which is an object spy that allows you to capture elements from your automation targets. So the next tab is the Execute tab, and this allows you to either play the robot using F5 or this button, or alternatively, you can run your robot in debug mode, and when you're doing that, there are several options here that allow you to control the way debugging works. And we'll get into all of this stuff in future videos in the debugging section. But just be aware that you can use F5 to run or F7 to debug your robots. Finally, the Setup tab. I would avoid clicking Reset Settings, because if you have various settings that you've created, when you click on this, I'm pretty sure it resets everything without warning, so try to avoid that button. Setup Extensions allows you to be able to install the UiPath agent in these various runtime targets, and in the installation section, I think I talk about setting those up. The Publish button allows you to push your robot into the Orchestrator web app so people can use it. I'm going to double-click on one of these items to close up that ribbon for now to give us more real estate. And I'm going to draw your attention to this universal search box here. This is amazing because in the future, when you get lots of activities here inside your robot, you're going to have to be able to rapidly drill down into nested activities and find things. For example, you can see in this particular append line activity, I've used a string called wasEmpty. So if I jump up here to the universal search and type wasEmpty, because maybe I saw that in a log file, you can see that it immediately shows me that within my main workflow, I've got file.toString plus wasEmpty. And if I double click on that, it zooms me right into that activity, even if it was buried several layers down deep. And it allows me to very quickly examine or update the properties for that activity. If I type in something more generic like text, you can see that in the main workflow area, there are several places where it was found. For instance, here, if I double click, it takes me to that activity. Inside my library, which is this tab over here on the top left, there are several items in the library that contain the word text. And then down here in the activities node, that represents all of these activities over here in this pane. So it gives you a sense of which of these activities have something to do with text. So that search bar is very powerful. Moving over here to these tabs on the left, Activities is actually one of those tabs, but you can notice it's pinned by default. If I click on this pin, it collapses down here along with those tabs, and that gives me even more real estate here in the center. So when I want to access my activities, I can click on them, do a search here, again for text, and you can see that all of the activities that have something to do with text are displayed, and then I could click and drag one on, and after I do that, that panel will disappear, leaving me more real estate here in the center. My project tab shows me the various files that are in my project, and every project by default is simply going to have one main.xaml file. And finally, in this library tab, by default, every project comes with some samples that you can open up and look at. And there's also a snippets node that allows you to stash away certain things that you might commonly use, like delays of various lengths or different kinds of loops. They're already preset and ready to use, so you simply click and drag them into your work area to get started quickly. And of course, you can pin any one of these things open like we demonstrated before by simply clicking on this pin, and that's going to cause it to stay there permanently. Here in the Activities window, you can expand all of the activities or collapse them all. And this little icon here is very important, and I talked about this in the installation section. This is what you click on to manage which packages you currently have installed. So notice I have all these packages installed, but I do not have this Microsoft Activities extensions installed. To do that, I can simply click the Install button. Moving clockwise, we've already discussed this main development area, and I just wanted to point out that you can click the Expand All or Collapse All link to essentially show and hide all the various nested activities in your workspace. Moving over to the Properties pane, these are going to be configurable properties for any of your activities. And we can expand that by dragging out this bar here, and then secondly, by hovering here and pulling these open. So that gives you more space to interact with. And of course, you can stretch this down if you want to as well. So now any activity you click on in your workspace is going to display its properties so you can configure them accordingly. It's important to note that when you hover over any given activity on the top left here, you can see it tells you what type it is. It's a read text file. But you can see that same thing here at the top of the Properties window. When this one is selected, you can see that it's UiPath core activity of read text file. And then you can change the various properties of that activity by clicking in these text boxes. And if that's not enough real estate for typing, you simply click on these three dots, and that opens up a larger expandable window to modify whatever property it is you're currently focused on. So you can see those properties change with any activity I click on. Now moving down here to the outline window, this is a brilliant way to be able to quickly navigate through your project. So if you've got activities nested inside activities, nested inside activities, you can very quickly expand these various nodes and then click on various adjacent activities or even activities from a higher node to be able to jump to them and select them in the designer very quickly. So this is a really handy tool when you've got a complex robot with many different levels of nested activities. Finally, back down here at the bottom of the workspace window, this tab will show and hide a pane with a list of all the variables in your project. So when you click on it, it toggles that variables window open and closed. So that keeps your variables out of the way, but still within very easy reach. This toggles arguments for any given file that's currently open. So if you have extracted a workflow as a separate file, you're going to have arguments that are input values or output values from that workflow file. Imports are all the namespaces that have been imported that allow you to take advantage of the .NET framework to do interesting things. And we'll talk about importing namespaces in a future lecture. Over here, you've got a Fit to Screen button, which shrinks everything down to fit on the screen. And if you happen to be scrolled in real close, you can grab this little hand and you can move things around. And you can also click on this to expand this little overview guy, and you can drag this around to all the various places you know exist and get to a spot that you want to edit very quickly and then close that up. And if I turn off the hand here and click on this activity, that activity is going to sync up down here in the outline. So if I jump back up here and click on this activity, notice that my outline changes and highlights the current activity that I'm on, and I have my properties available right here. Last but not least, this Output tab down here at the bottom is something you can also pin open if you want to. But this is a place where you can view the items that you're logging, and they can be log items of type error, type warning, information, or trace. You can clear this window by clicking here. You can show or hide the timestamps, and by clicking on any of these things, you can toggle the ones that you're viewing or not viewing. And we'll get to that in a future lecture when I talk about log message. But this is a great window to have open as your robot is running in debug mode because you can watch the various steps go by, and you can even expand the window to be able to read more items. Click that link again to hide it. So that was a quick tour of all the most important windows you're going to use on a daily basis in UiPath.